No matter how hard Nvidia tries to help AMD gain market share, it seems AMD really isn't interested. After the disastrous launch of Nvidia's 4000 series, the expectation was that AMD would capitalize and deliver a killer product at killer prices. Well, the pricing of the 7900s is okay, but what about the performance? Let's dive deep into AMD's RDNA 3 cringe fest of a presentation and try and make sense of what Team Red's strategy is for the GPU market. Today's video is sponsored by urcdkeys.com. If you buy a retail Windows 10 key, you will probably spend $100 or more, but if you buy an OEM key using a service like urcdkeys, it will cost you less than $15 after you use the coupon code C25. The keys work globally, and if you want Windows 11, what I recommend you do is just buy Windows 10 and get a free upgrade while you can. Personally, I use Windows 10 Pro. Once you've made your purchase using one of the many different payment options available, you will instantly find your key in your purchased orders on the urcdkeys website. Click Get Keys and copy the key. Then, after you've installed Windows, of course, press Start and search for Activate and click on Activation Settings. Then click Change Product Key, paste in the key and click Next. That's it. Quick and easy and cheap, and your Windows 10 is now activated. If you need Office 2021 Professional, you can use the same 25% discount code C25 and get it for just $59.98. Since you're over there, check out the Black Friday sale for some great discounts on peripherals like lightweight gaming mice and controllers and some very affordable 60% mechanical keyboards. Thank you to URCD Keys for sponsoring today's video. Check the links in the video description to get your OEM Windows keys today. So first, the positives. There are none. Well, I guess the cards look really cool, especially the 7900 XT. I love this stealth look, and the product looks really premium. The XTX looks a bit weird, but I guess I'd have to see it in person. The XT looks awesome though. Now onto the negatives, of which there are plenty. If you're an AMD fanbot, you should probably stop watching now. So unfortunately, the chiplets package is basically the same that was leaked a while back, with one graphics core die in the center and 6 more memory chiplets around it. To me, that's an incredible missed opportunity by AMD. If you saw my videos on chiplets GPUs, the whole point was to be able to have more than one graphics die and as such get massive performance benefits. Moving the cache to its own chiplets and keeping it in a less expensive node is cool and all, and will represent significant savings for AMD in a time where fabrication costs at TSMC have gone through the roof, but it completely misses the point of moving to chiplets in the first place. In Zen, you have the possibility of having multiple logic dies and get a huge boost to throughput without losing much in raw speed. That's what makes Zen's chiplets so interesting, and it's what made Zen so disruptive. Do you think anyone would have cared about Zen if the flagship product only had one core chiplet and an I/O die? The promise of multiple core chiplets is what made Zen a success, not the cost savings. It's always been a challenge to replicate this in GPU land because of latency, but as I showed in AMD's patent analysis, this is something they have theoretically fixed by having the system see only the main chiplet and therefore being fooled into thinking there's only one GPU in the system, while the workload distribution is orchestrated by the GPU itself. Or at least that's what the patent promises in simple terms. AMD haven't been able to make that a reality, and we'll look at the claim performance in a bit, so the only benefit to RDNA 3's packaging really is just cost. If that's the one thing where this product can differentiate itself in the market, you'd think that the cost would be passed on to us. Instead, the 7900 XTX is launching at the same price as the 6900 XT. Again, what's the point of moving to chiplets then? To increase AMD's margins? Margins on what? A product that no one will want to buy? If the performance jump isn't as dramatic as what we saw with the 4090 compared to the 3090, then the price difference would have to be considerable for that to be a reason to even pay attention to AMD this generation. $1,000 is way too expensive for a product that will only be competing with Nvidia's second or third best GPU if they launch a 480 Ti. It's too early to say for sure, but based on AMD's shit show of a presentation, it would seem the 7900s are a complete fail in both performance and cost. I was hopeful that we would see a 2-die GPU with some memory chiplets added to it and see a true revolutionary product. Or at the very least, a move to chiplets would represent a return to sensible GPU pricing like we had before the 2080 Ti launch. So either RDNA 3 represented a massive jump in performance compared to the 4090 and it would launch at a similar or lower price, or it would be a bit slower but cost something like $500. Those are the two ways in which you can disrupt the market. The people celebrating the $999 MSRP will never be buying a $1,000 GPU, because if they were in the market with that much money to burn on a GPU, they wouldn't mind spending an extra $600 for the 4090 and just get the best. In this segment, $600 is nothing. People celebrating AMD's pricing for RDNA 3 are completely missing the point. And honestly, they're trying to justify AMD's shortcomings by comparing it in a metric that has little weight for that segment. I hope I'm positively surprised when I do review the cards, but so far this looks like an absolute fail from AMD. They didn't beat Nvidia in performance, and the pricing just isn't disruptive enough. Let me try and clarify that. The fact that the 4080 and 4090 are so expensive doesn't make the 7900 XTX and XT automatically good value. It just makes Nvidia look greedy, which is what they are, and rightly so. Why wouldn't they be greedy when their fans buy everything they make, whatever the price, and their competitors can never meet expectations? Of course the 4090 costs $1,600. In fact, I imagine Jensen Huang is kicking himself for not making it even more expensive. $1,000 for the 7900 XTX is not disruptive in any way. It's the same price as the 6900 XT for a relatively small boost to performance going by AMD's own numbers. Why the hype in moving to chiplets if there's no tangible benefit for consumers? It's the same freaking price. The performance isn't as good as Nvidia's. Unless AMD has a 2-core die GPU in the works, RDNA 3 looks like a complete fail. So I got the chiplets packaging completely wrong, and it's a shame that I did, not for myself, but for AMD's sake. I'm sure people will also be keen to point out that the 7900s draw like 100 watts less than Nvidia's 4000s, but does that really matter? If AMD came out with a card that was faster than the 4090 and it drew 100 watts more, do you really think people would care about power draw? AMD fans would be celebrating the fact that AMD was faster. It's as simple as that. Now, can the 7900 XTX be pushed further with more headroom for power draw? I spoke with a few AIBs, and from preliminary tests, it seems that the AIB OC models will only be about 3% faster than the reference 7900 XTX, so it seems that the XTX is already pushing as far as it can go. Now, keep in mind that that 3% number is based on early test drivers, so there's hope that it can be pushed a bit further. Once past that sweet spot in the frequency curve, you will probably only see a performance regression no matter how much wattage you put into it. I will repeat this because I know people will take this out of context. This 3% number is based on preliminary testing, and the drivers that AIBs have at the moment are very restrictive so as not to have performance numbers leak out. So it's possible that you can push the XTX beyond a 3% performance uplift. That's just the number I was told for now. Continuing with the negatives, one thing that stands out to me from the announced specs for the 7900 XTX and 7900 XT are the clock speeds. I was expecting much higher. AMD is announcing a 2.3 GHz game clock and a 2.5 GHz boost clock on the XTX. This means that the actual throughput of the card is only 56.5 teraflops and not 61 teraflops, as was shown in the live stream presentation, because the card won't be operating at 2.5 GHz all the time. That's compared to the RTX 4090's theoretical 82.58 teraflops. So in theory, in compute alone, the 4090 should be 46% faster than the 7900 XTX. Obviously, that doesn't say much about gaming as a whole, but there are games games where the 4090 will pull significantly ahead. Speaking of the presentation itself, it was incredibly disappointing and cringy in my opinion. AMD not showing raster performance versus Nvidia is absurd, given the 4090 has been out for several weeks now. It makes it seem that AMD has no confidence in their own product. To make matters worse, most of the performance results were obfuscated with FSR numbers rather than native performance, and there was this absurd push for 8K gaming that is so out of touch with the community that makes me wonder if AMD even understands the market they are in. I mean, I do care about 8K gaming, and I'm looking into getting an 8K OLED at some point, but not to use it with FSR, that's for sure. That defeats the purpose of moving to 8K for the higher resolution, unless FSR 3 somehow does miracles at upscaling. And I'm not representative of AMD's core audience. Most of the people watching that presentation were looking at an upgrade to 4K, not 8K. And if they were looking for a reason to upgrade to 8K, then your card's performance would have to match those expectations and be backed with raw performance numbers, not with fantasy FSR marketing promises. There's a complete and very concerning disconnect with presenting a card as an 8K capable product and then not confidently showing its raster performance, rather hiding it behind second-rate upscaling techniques. How can AMD be this clueless? It's worrying. Who at AMD looked at the potential 8K buyer and said, hey, you know what these people spending $20,000 on an 8K television want? They want to save $600 on a GPU to run upscaled 4K content. Let's spend a good chunk of our presentation on that. Do you guys at AMD not understand how stupid this is? Especially when you don't have a product that you can present with confidence. This was a new low for AMD's marketing, and that's saying something. That bit where Scott Herkelman proudly poked fun at Nvidia for RDNA 3 GPUs using regular 8-pin PCIe connectors instead of the fire hazard new ones that the 4090 uses was incredibly cringy and just so petty and out of touch with reality that it's honestly hard to have any hope for the Radeon group to ever have any chance in the GPU market. If AMD had a product that beat the 4090 in raster performance, then sure, you can poke fun at a connector. But if you are delivering yet another mediocre GPU as your flagship, then going for the power connector angle makes it seem like you are really grasping at straws to find some way to make your product look better. A shitty power connector, as embarrassing as it is for Nvidia, is something they can fix. The lackluster performance of your product is not something you can fix, AMD. So stop being cringy and start delivering actual good GPUs. What marketing people at these companies need to understand is that a product should be sold on its merits first and foremost. Do you really have to copy Nvidia in everything, down to even the stupid shit that they do? If the XTX performs better than the 4090, then come out and show it. If it doesn't, then don't try and hide that with FSR and cheap shots at stuff that don't really matter. Just position your products with honesty. It's really not that hard. And there is such a thing as great marketing, and it can be valuable, but this AMD presentation was a lesson in how not to present a product. It's the exact opposite of good marketing. Now, at the end of the day, all that matters is performance, so let's try and decipher what AMD showed. So in pure rasterization rendering, as Scott Herkelman put it, the 7900 XTX is up to 70% faster than the 6950 XT. So we have Modern Warfare 2 at 50% faster, Watch Dogs Legion also at 50%, and Cyberpunk at 70%. Using some aggregate numbers from Tech Power Up and others, in Cyberpunk 2077 we can place the 7900 XTX here at 66 FPS on average, so about only 7% slower than the 4090. In Watch Dogs Legion, the 7900 XTX would place here, so about 9.3% slower than the 4090. And finally, in Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, the 7900 XTX would place here, so only 3.5% slower than a 4090, at least according to AMD's own numbers. So taking these three titles, the 7900 XTX is only 6.6% slower than the 4090, while being 37.5% cheaper, or $600 cheaper MSRP versus MSRP. Of course, the 4090 is selling for over 2,000 euros here right now, so who knows what the XTX will sell for. But if they launch at MSRP, then there's simply no reason to get a 4090 when you're only missing out on less than 7% of the performance while saving a whopping $600 at least. least. That is, if these games were representative of the average performance, which I highly doubt. I think these are the very best results that you will see. Just look at the difference from the 6000 series presentation. Here, Lisa Su was showing the 6900 XT versus the 3090 with actual rasterization numbers, FPS numbers, and 10 different AAA games. Contrast that with the 7900 XTX, where AMD are showing 3 games, no FPS numbers, and not even comparing it to the 4090. How can anyone have any confidence in the 7900 XTX when you compare these two presentations? To me, this indicates that in many instances, the 4090 will be miles ahead, even if in a handful of titles it's only 6.6% slower. In games where the compute performance matters more, I think we will see that larger gap. Obviously, AMD chose those specific games for a reason. 6.6% is likely best case scenario. I mean, in reality, it's possible that the 7900s can stand on their own merits, even if they're not faster than the 4090, but the pricing would have to be way lower. If your GPU wins, then you can charge whatever you want. Like I said earlier, the 7900 XTX being $1,000 doesn't make it good value just because the 4090 is $600 more. Nvidia has the performance crown, so they can sell the 4090 at whatever price they want. There's nothing above it. Now, of course, we still don't know the performance of the 4080, but I doubt that it's faster than the XTX. It will probably be around 10% slower, and it's of course more expensive. That means Nvidia will eventually launch a 4080 Ti that matches the XTX and drop the price of the 4080 to $999 as well, and then launch a 4090 Ti that will be about 10% faster than the 4090 and cost like $2,500. Whatever the case may be, the 4080 was a stupid product, and the XTX just confirms that, but that was always Nvidia's plan. The 4080 is there to make the 4090 look good. People spending $1,200 on a GPU will spend $1,600, no problem. In fact, the same is true for $1,000. That leaves Nvidia's leadership position well cemented at the top of the stack, with AMD offering value alternatives, at least in their mind. So not much has changed since the last few generations. Some might point out that AMD's core die is only 300mm square, while Nvidia's 4090 is 600mm squared or thereabouts. But if you add to the 7900 XTX the memory chiplets, then you're not really that far off. Probably 500 to 550mm squared, divided into 2 nodes, yes, but without a material change to the end consumer price. So I don't see an advantage there. Nvidia has done so much harm to the PC enthusiast community, while at the same time alienating their core fans, that I think AMD could have become the go-to option for enthusiasts looking to upgrade to 4K, especially in these times of financial uncertainty, if they had passed on the chiplet savings to consumers and released the XTX at $600 or even $500. Like I said before, anyone in the $1,000 GPU range will just spend the extra $600. It's really disappointing that AMD can't have a disruptive impact on the market. Taking a quick look at the ray tracing claims, it's difficult to say exactly, but if we assume 4K Ultra and RT Ultra in Metro with Hairworks off and PhysX off, then this is how far behind the 7900 XTX would be from the 4090, a massive 53% slower. It's possible I have incorrect data, or that AMD's claims are for different settings in Metro Exodus, not that ray tracing really matters. I haven't seen a game where I felt I absolutely needed it, but it is the future, and if this is correct, and I really hope it's not this bad, then AMD really needs to improve here. I mean, in the previous gen, RT performance was poor, and it's only gotten 50% better, according to AMD. 50% better than poor is still kinda bad, so maybe this graph isn't too far off. Also, like we saw earlier, the 4090 has 46% more compute throughput than the XTX, and ray tracing is one area where this difference will be more pronounced. AMD did show some more 4K ray tracing results, or should I say FSR nonsense. Dying Light 2 Stay Human, for instance, according to the end notes, was running FSR in performance mode, and it was still only hitting 72 FPS. If you turn FSR off, it drops to what looks like 20 FPS or thereabouts. I mean, are you really turning on ray tracing to then have to endure FSR in performance mode? That doesn't seem worth it. I think the overall image will look worse than with RT off at native resolution, and you'll get higher frame rates. So basically, Basically what AMD was doing with all this FSR nonsense was hiding the very poor real-time ray tracing performance on the 7900s. One exception might be the Callisto Protocol, a game I covered in my last video looking at next-gen graphics. The game devs have a technical partnership with AMD, so it will be interesting to see if AMD can have a ray tracing win versus Nvidia for once. I highly doubt it. Forspoken was shown yet again, and I was hoping we would see a demo of Smart Access Storage, but nope. It looks like Forspoken will be another one of those benchmark-only games that run well on AMD hardware, but that no one actually plays, like Strange Brigade or Godfall or Ashes of the Singularity. Still on the topic of FSR, AMD announced a partnership with Ubisoft and had a demo of the Snowdrop engine running a ray-traced scene at over 80 FPS with FSR enabled. Where is the native performance AMD where? And of course AMD announced FSR 3 as expected, which like Nvidia's DLSS 3 adds generated frames to the rendered output. So fluid motion frames is AMD's equivalent to Nvidia's frame generation. No one asked for more latency in games, but sure, whatever. FSR 3 will be coming out next year, and who knows, maybe it will surprise us and produce an upscaled image that's just as good as a native equivalent. I'm skeptical, but we'll see. Now a word on the 7900 XT, so the cut-down version. It's a bit of an oddity, to be honest. At first glance, it looks like predatory segmentation. In other words, a card that is close in price to the step-up, but has a significant drop in performance, making you feel like you might as well spend the extra $100 for a decent jump in performance. But it's hard to say if that's really the case. I mean, if it's only 5% slower than the XTX, maybe the $100 savings are worth it, but anything more than that, and I think you're better off spending the extra $100. I will have to test them myself and see how close they really are. AMD spent a good while talking about DisplayPort 2.1 and how the 7900 supports it, and high refresh and high resolution gaming like 4K at 480Hz and 8K at 165Hz. That's great and all, but if the GPU can't render frames that high, then it's a moot point. They did tease a new 8K Odyssey Neo G9 from Samsung, while emphasizing it will be the first 8K over DisplayPort 2.1 display, but it says on the slide that it's 8K horizontal only, so not quite 8K. All I know is I want one. I don't need one, I just want one. You can expect more details at CES. Man, can you believe it's almost CES time already? Anyway, the point here is that AMD is trying to find unique selling points that will set their GPUs apart from Nvidia's, and they are banking on a bunch of 8K gaming displays being introduced at CES, weighing on a purchase decision from enthusiasts. Seeing as you can run 8K with FSR at 96 FPS in Assassin's Creed Valhalla, for instance, with a 4090 you'd presumably be limited to 60Hz, while with the 7900 XTX you can push up to 165Hz at 8K. There are several problems with this strategy, most of which I've already discussed. Firstly, these 8K monitors are going to be obscenely expensive, so that goes completely against AMD's own positioning as a value alternative to Nvidia. Secondly, it doesn't make sense to get an 8K display and then run what is effectively upscaled 4K content on it through FSR. At that point, I think you're better off just running 4K native on a good 4K OLED monitor. And thirdly, Nvidia tried pushing 8K gaming when the 3090 launched and no one was interested, to the point where they didn't repeat that with the 4090. The timing just isn't right to be trying to sell 8K. I have seen in person a 4K OLED next to an 8K OLED display running native content, and I could see the difference between them, perhaps surprisingly. In fact, much to my surprise, the jump from 4K to 8K felt as transformative as the jump from 1080p to 4K, which I know sounds crazy, but to my eyes it did. It's something you have to see in person. But until people have that experience, I think they will be very skeptical of being able to tell much of a difference between 4K and 8K. So again, it's just not the right time for AMD to be pushing this narrative. Good high refresh rate 4K monitors are only now getting affordable, and that's what AMD should be focusing on. One welcome feature which I think will fly under the radar is HyperRX, basically a one-button solution for those who just want their games to run faster without compromising too much on graphical fidelity. So you get lower latency, FSR, and Radeon boost all combined into a single click. I like this a lot. AMD showed Dying Light 2 going from 90 FPS on average with a 30 millisecond response time to 166 FPS and 11 millisecond response time. So that's a massive 84% performance performance uplift and a 63% reduction in latency, all with one click. It remains to be seen what the impact to the visuals will be, but this is something I will definitely be testing out. Hopefully in the future this will also activate AI-driven functionality. This is only coming in the first half of 2023, so it's still a way off and it's not really for me. I like to tweak each individual game, but for the majority of people I think this is a great feature and something I'll recommend to my normie friends. The GPUs also support AV1 hardware encoding and decoding, and AMD has announced some OBS-specific optimizations. This could be very beneficial for streamers, especially if you stream first-person shooters. We also got the first taste of the Xilinx acquisition's impact on Radeon products, with the Xilinx AI and content adaptive machine learning being able to reconstruct text and UI elements so that they're nice and crisp in streaming outputs. Now, the one exciting announcement for creators like myself came with a new media engine that supports AV1 encoding in Premiere and Handbrake, among others, with AMD promising up to 7 times faster encoding. In addition to that, AMD introduced Smart Access Video, which comes in line with something I've talked about in the past, and that's AMD's ability to leverage their platform synergies. Smart Access Video distributes encode and decode workloads between your Ryzen CPU and Radeon GPU for a 30% uplift in 4K encoding and editing. This is huge for someone like myself, and I will probably be upgrading to the 7900 XTX just for this feature alone. So what are my final thoughts on this presentation? I find it very disappointing that AMD still hasn't caught up to Nvidia in raw performance. I mean, wait for reviews and I should have one here on the channel on launch day, but from what AMD showed, or rather didn't show, it seems the XTX will be competing with a to-be-launched 4080 Ti, and the 4090 will continue to sit alone at the top of the food chain. Nvidia won't even bother launching a 4090 Ti for at least a year now. I also think the 7900 XTX and XT are poorly positioned in the pricing stack, and at these prices only the die-hard AMD fans will be buying them. Someone seriously considering an upgrade in the $1,000 range will just spend the extra $600. I think the greatest disappointment is that I really wanted Nvidia to be punished for its never-ending greed and complete disrespect for the people that made them who they are. I personally don't care who wins, Nvidia or AMD. I barely have time to play video games, but I do care about consumers' interests, and I feel like without true competition, Nvidia will continue to harm our hobby. It's very disappointing that this was all AMD could come up with in the move to chiplets. I was expecting much more. A move to chiplets is inevitable thanks to the rising costs of manufacturing on the bleeding edge nodes, but until we see multiple core graphics dies working together, I don't think Nvidia has anything to be worried about. And you can bet that if Nvidia moves to chiplets, they will do them a lot better than what AMD has done here. With a torrent of new games coming up at the end of this year and early next year, gamers will be looking to upgrade to a GPU that can deliver 4K, and if the 4090 sells out everywhere, I think it's possible AMD can make money on the 7900 XTX and XT during this holiday season, but eventually I think they will have to cut prices for these to be desirable. Overall, I find RDNA 3 extremely disappointing based on what was shown. Hopefully I'll be surprised when I actually get to test them, and AMD really needs to completely overhaul their marketing department. It's getting to the point where Nvidia are not AMD's greatest enemy, but rather AMD's marketing department is AMD's greatest enemy. You guys can do better. Being a non-biased and independent voice on YouTube doesn't come without its costs. Nvidia is no longer supporting my channel because I've said mean things about them, and if I continue to be this honest about AMD and Intel, I might not get access to their review sampling programs for much longer. Hopefully that won't be the case, but please do consider supporting my channel through Patreon, otherwise soon all will get our influencers pushing narratives. With your support, I might even be able to afford a 4090 to do some independent testing on. Join my Patreon today and get exclusive access to the Cortex Discord server. Thanks for watching, and until the next one.